So I'm coming over here. So welcome to Feminist Question Time. We are from Brighton. We're not actually at the Filia conference, but we are in a flat in Brighton. And I'm just checking that we are going. If anybody's managed to enter the webinar, can you say hi so we can see that you Okay, brilliant. Hi, Amrita, and hi, Lauren. Hi, Sarah. Oh, hi, lots of people. Okay, it's working. So it's absolutely brilliant to be here today. We are, many of us, in Brighton because of the Filia conference, but we unfortunately were not able to speak at the Filia conference. So we're running this feminist question time to take advantage of us being here and to talk about some of the things we like or we wanted to talk about. And so we're going to hear from Cara Dansky first, then Lierre, then Sheila Jeffries and Elizabeth Miller, and then finally from me. We think the webinar is going to carry on for about an hour and a half, like normal. And it would be really helpful if you can't hear, because we haven't got a very good mic, if somebody could tell us, just say, I can't hear. But at the moment, can you tell us, you sound okay at the moment, right? I'm quite a lot closer than other people. If you actually can't hear, we'll come and sit a bit closer or something like that. Okay, so we're going to aim to be speaking from the chairs. And if you can't hear, just let us know. Okay, so I'm really pleased to introduce our first speaker, Cara Dansky, who's going to talk about, I think if you introduce what you're talking about yourself. Okay, over to you, Cara.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I am here today to talk about two cases that are currently pending before the U.S. Supreme Court. One is called Little versus Hecox, and the other is called West Virginia versus BPJ. These cases involve nearly identical facts. They both involve state laws that were passed to protect female-only sports, one in Idaho and one in West Virginia. And in each case, two male athletes sued their states, arguing that the laws in question violate these male athletes' rights under the law and under the Constitution. The only difference factually is that in the Little versus Hecox case, where Bradley Little is the governor of Idaho, Hecox is an adult man. He's always been male and he is still male, and he's an adult man claimed that the state of Idaho had violated his rights under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. In the West Virginia case, the plaintiff is a minor male named BPJ whose puberty has been suppressed. There are slightly different laws at stake in these cases. One of them is Title IX, and one of them is the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. For reasons I do not understand, Lindsay Hecox only raised the equal protection argument, not Title IX, but BPJ has alleged violations of both. Both complaints were filed by the ACLU within a month of the state laws being enacted. Now, in Hecox, the district court found in his favor quickly. The court found that he's a man because he says so, and blocked the law from taking effect. The state of Idaho appealed to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is where WDI USA filed its first ever friend of the court brief before the Ninth Circuit in November of 2020, back when we were still WHRC. The case went back and forth between the Ninth Circuit and the district court for 4 very long years. One issue, and I'll explain why this is relevant, one issue was whether the case had become moot for one reason or another, with Hecox having dropped out of school at one point, and the ACLU consistently argued that the case was not moot. The Ninth Circuit eventually decided in 2024 that Hecox is a woman on the basis of his woman gender identity, and that the district court was right to block the law. Idaho asked the Supreme Court to review the case, and WDI USA filed a friend of the court brief in the Supreme Court, urging it to do so, as Wolf did as well. In BPJ, this case stands out because it was the first in the country in which a judge who had been appointed by a Democratic president found in favor of material reality. As mentioned, BPJ is a minor boy who has had his puberty blocked, and the ACLU filed a complaint against West Virginia in 2021. At first, the judge, who was appointed by President Bill Clinton, found in his favor. But then, a year later, and upon further consideration, the judge reversed himself and found in favor of material reality, in a fascinating ruling, because you can tell that this Democratic appointed judge hates the West Virginia law that protects women's sports. but he had to do the right thing and rule in favor of material reality anyway. West Virginia appealed to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. That court has a really annoying law on the books saying that kids who say they're the opposite sex are the opposite sex for legal purposes. So it found in favor of BPJ and against West Virginia. West Virginia asked the Supreme Court to review the case, and WDI USA filed another friend of the court brief urging it to do so. The WTI USA brief in the case argues that both state laws are consistent with Title IX and that both state laws are consistent with the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment because they allow schools to maintain single-sex sports. Then we go a step further and argue that both Title IX and the Equal Protection Clause require schools to maintain single-sex sports. I want to say one quick thing about the Equal Protection Clause, but I don't have time to get into too much detail about it. Basically, when a claim of sex discrimination is filed under the Equal Protection Clause, courts evaluate that claim under something called intermediate scrutiny. That's because the courts have ruled over the years that laws that discriminate against people on the basis of sex are unfair. But laws that discriminate between people on the basis of sex sometimes aren't unfair and are actually good for protecting women and girls as a sex class under the law. The ACLU would very much like the United States Supreme Court to now rule that transgender status is also a quasi-suspect class for equal protection purposes. We very much want them to lose on that. It's one of their favorite arguments. They make it consistently, and we think there's a reasonable chance that the Supreme Court is going to rule in our favor, that women and girls exist as a sex class. All of this brings us to 2025 and to where things get really interesting. Earlier this year, the Supreme Court kind of stunned everyone by agreeing to take the case after several years of floundering and refusing to say what women and girls means. The brief of the states were due September 12th, and friend of the court briefs in support of the states were due on September 19th. September 19th was also the first day of the 2025 WDI USA convention, and I would be traveling all day that day, so I was very stressed out that week. One day I was sitting at my laptop working, and an email from the Supreme Court filing system dropped into my inbox, so I checked it out. It said that the state of Idaho was asking for more time to file its brief. I was mildly annoyed about that because I wanted the case to go forward as quickly as possible, but that was okay if Idaho needed more time. But then I saw that the reason Idaho wanted more time to file its brief was that the ACLU was now saying the case was moot. I was like, what? When did the ACLU say that? So I did some digging and learned that the ACLU had withdrawn Lindsay Hecox's original complaint. It was now asking the Supreme Court to vacate the Ninth Circuit 2024 decision and dismiss the entire matter as moot. The ACLU had won before both the district court and the Ninth Circuit, and now it was asking the Supreme Court to dismiss legal rulings in its own favor. It's difficult to overstate the significance of what is going on here. For 5 long years, the ACLU insisted that Hecox is a woman on the basis of his say-so. For 5 long years, various federal courts had to address this, read legal briefs filed by both sides and filed by countless organizations, including WDI USA and Wolf. People spent a lot of time and money, and now, in late 2025, the ACLU is like, oh, never mind, just kidding. Please forget everything we've been saying about this for 5 years and pretend as though none of this ever happened. My take. The ACLU knows it's going to lose before the Supreme Court. Even though it now wants the Hecox case to just go away, it does not want BPJ to go away, and that's kind of interesting. I think the reason is that BPJ is a minor who has had his puberty blocked, and that therefore, goes the argument, he doesn't have male athletic advantage. Now, happily, the group Icons has filed a friend of the court brief with Dr. Emma Hilton, and they will make very persuasive arguments that boys who have had their puberty blocked still retain their male athletic advantage. Nonetheless, I think that the ACLU knows that this is its only remaining hope. Most people think we're going to win on both. As to whether the Supreme Court is going to dismiss the Hecox case as moot, I was talking to a friend shortly after it filed its motion, And she said, won't the Supreme Court justices be annoyed that the ACLU has wasted their time? Yes. If this case gets dismissed as moot, it will be a waste of the time of 9 Supreme Court justices who have now read countless briefs in the case, not to mention the district court, the appellate court, and countless organizations. But there's precedent that you can't just litigate a case over the course of several years, waste everyone's time, and then after the Supreme Court takes a case, just make it all go away by withdrawing your own original complaint. Idaho's brief arguing that the case is not moot was filed on September 26th, and the ACLU's brief arguing its own case is moot still argues that Lindsay Hecox is a woman, but now he no longer wants to compete in women's sports. It argues that Hecox has, quote unquote, received significant negative attention over his wanting to play women's sports. To which I say, too bad, so sad, Lindsay. Maybe you never should have called yourself a woman and demanded to participate in women's sports in the first damn place. Thank you.
I'm going to, so that was incredibly useful. I'm going to just make Lierre a co-host or something like that, so she can share the screen, and we're going to hear, so that should be happening now. Yeah, so that should be happening now. And can I just do a little sound check again? Is everybody, can you hear just about okay if somebody could say yes or no? There's lots of sound is fine. Okay, do tell us if it's not. Cara's got a really, really loud voice. So, for the rest of us, we might not have, so it might not be so good. Okay, I'm so pleased now we're going to hear from Lierre. So over to you.
So I'm not quite there as a panelist yet. It's just making a circle on me, and we're just not.
Okay, so what we can do is I might, if we just move this around, I can probably show it because you sent it to me.
I did send it to you. Hopefully
Yeah.
I sent you the right one.
Yeah, so let's move this around.
Oh, wait a minute.
You're getting it?
It's happening.
Coming up, I think.
Yeah, here we are. Oh, I got it.
Right. See, if we right, yeah, right.
Still lined up.
So you want to mute yourself on your life.
Okay.
Right.
This one. Share.
Yeah, so somebody, Tamarik's saying it's lovely to see you all together in one room. It is really nice being here. Somebody's.
It's me still.
You need to make
Okay, it's all off.
Okay.
That work?
Yeah, and you need to a little big screen.
There we go.
We're there.
Is there something else you need to do?
I think that's it. That's it. It's perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. All right. So I was asked to just give you all updates on what Wolf is doing and to how it's going in the United States, basically. So as I'm sure everybody knows, no, I got it. Thank you. Trump was elected and outrolled these executive orders. So I can't say it's not been fun having a tiny bit of help from the White House. But you know, we've got Trump in the White House, so you take what you can get. That's a whole other discussion. Anyway, late January, early February, out come these executive orders. Now, executive orders are not really laws. They're kind of their own thing. They don't quite have the power of law, but they are definitely something that people have to follow. So out they come. We have had quite a number of them. And it's sometimes hard to track where they are, what's happening. A lot of women heaved a huge sigh of relief and said things like, yay, we won, it's over. And we have not won, it is not over. These are going to have to be fought sort of inch by inch across all the territory of state legislatures to win back what we have lost, you know, at the altar of gender identity. But so that's where some of these stand here. We actually on the Wolf website have a page that is dedicated to tracking what's going on with each of these executive orders. So if you really have questions about it, you can go and take a look. So for instance, there were the executive orders to move men out of women's prisons. So these are the three that happened, and you can see where they all are and how it's moving forward or not. The one at the bottom there, the Doe v. Bondi one, we filed a brief in that case. And I just want to show you that we have been trying really hard to get radical feminist arguments in front of the court, whichever court. And that this is something that's been, to me, very exciting in my life. To watch both WDI USA and Wolf do this has been amazing, because throughout most of my life, there were certainly liberal arguments made before the court, but actual radical feminist arguments have been few and far between. One of the great ones was, of course, Catherine McKinnon arguing before the Supreme Court that there was a thing called sexual harassment, and she defined it, and she made it be a law. That she's the one that did that, and that was a radical feminist argument, and there just aren't that many. We usually are sort of stuck cobbling together what we can of law that's out there already. And instead, we are trying to actually insert something feminist into jurisprudence. And I just really like that we are at least attempting to do this, because we're tiny. You have to understand how little our groups are compared to people like the ACLU. I mean, just like orders of magnitude larger is what they are. So anyway, this is what we did in the Doe v. Bondi, our brief against that. And all of our briefs are on the website, and you're welcome to go read them, because we really try to make very clear-cut, just basic feminist arguments that really most of the country agrees with, certainly in terms of gender identity. So our argument is that that putting men in women's prisons violates the Eighth Amendment. So if you're not an American, you wouldn't necessarily know this. We have a constitution. I know you don't in the UK. And part of the constitution involved later adding this thing called the Bill of Rights. So there's various amendments to our Constitution, and the first 10 are known as the Bill of Rights, because they were done pretty much immediately after the federal Constitution was made. And we don't have a religion in the United States. That's actually the point of the First Amendment, is there is no state religion. So the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, have been called our civic religion, that we all accept these, and it's sort of baked into our character as Americans, those first 10 amendments. And that includes very strongly free speech. That's the First Amendment. Freedom of assembly, First Amendment. Freedom from state interference on matters of religion. We are never going to have a state religion. All of that is in the First Amendment. And then you can move on to the other ones. The Eighth Amendment is the one that is against and unusual punishment. And this means the government cannot torture you. So that to do this to us. Okay, it's necessary to dispose of the argument that men identifying as women are at a risk in men's prisons. As explained in the governance brief, 99% of male inmates identifying as transgender choose to remain in male prisons. Now, this is a fact. Their group will not tell you this, because
speak a bit slower, they're saying.
I'm very sorry.
No, but it's good.
I'm not necessarily loud, but I am fast. This is my culture. I'm from the Northeast of the United States, the urban Northeast, and we are naturally caffeinated people. I do not have to drink coffee. I do not need coffee. This is how we talk. So I will try to moderate my innate sense of speed. Okay. Anyway, the poor, horrible. It's so this transgender, they're so oppressed, blah, blah. 99% of them want to remain in the male prison. And how this breaks down, as you might guess, it all depends on who they want to have sex with. If they want to have sex with men, they want to stay in the men's prison. If they want to have sex with women, they request to be transferred to the women's prison. And it really is just that simple. Also, rates of sexual assaults in male prisons are generally low, sometimes less. Really, anyone who's taken up this, the poor trans, it's the first thing you'll hear when you make these arguments. Oh my goodness, these men are going to get raped. They're not. And of course, all rape is horrible. I want to be very clear. No one should be raped. No one should be raped in prison. But women are dramatically at higher rates of, risk of rape in the women's prison, whether or not the trans dudes are in there or not. It's, they're at risk. So putting men in there obviously isn't going to help. But the men are not particularly at risk in the way that the women are. So that's, one of our arguments. And this is all backed up with statistics from the federal government. We're not making these numbers up out of our own, imaginings. This is like real stuff that the government has investigated, and this is what they found. Second, that the men who identify as women in prison are dangerous to women. So, a FOIA request, the Freedom of Information Act, they're there for sex offenses. And that number is 4 times high as the number in the general federal prison population. So 4 times more of these men who identify as women, 4 times the rate of sexual offenses. So these are very dangerous men. Third, there's statistically the security risk compared to men who do not identify as transgender. So 33% of them, they're only 11% of the population in the federal prisons, but 33% of them hold this classification of being a high security risk. So they're just violent. This is the problem. They're violent offenders, and much more so than the general population. And finally, this has been known for years in law enforcement, sexual homicide perpetrators have been found to have a high occurrence of genital study. 54% of sexual homicide killers were either cross-dressers or transvestites. So today, of course, they'd be called trans women. So these are, rather chilling statistics. This is what women are up against in the prison. So indeed, we are asserting that this is a form of torture to make women share an 8x8 cell with one of these men, and that should be self-evident. So we're just trying to get these arguments before the court. And these are just, like I said, using statistics from the federal government itself. These aren't, women investigating it. This is just what the government has found. Okay, so this is the executive order that was supposed to ensure the collection of accurate data based on sex, because of course all the numbers now are getting skewed because they're counting men as women and women as men. So you can look up and see like where these all stand. But every single one of these executive orders, is really the point, has hit these walls where they're being getting injunctions, people are suing about them, the ACLU is taking it on, all kinds of people, and we haven't really had much action on them. I mean, like all the women who said, "Yay, it's over, we've got help, we don't have to worry about this anymore," it just simply isn't true. Like we haven't really seen action on any of these because of, all of the fight back that we're getting. So it really is going to be inch by inch for us to see real progress on this. So ending hospitals that conduct, quote, gender treatments on minors. So these are some of the big cases that are coming up. All of these have been appealed, they go back and forth. There's an injunction, there's not, there is, there's not. But all these states that had already put up legislation to define children as the gender that they say they are and all that, it's, they've established it now on the state level, and we're going to have to fight them. It's just going to have to be state by state. And then this is the military ones. So these various challenges and files. So these various challenges. Okay, I'm gonna give it a second.
I don't know how to turn this on. Okay.
We get it.
We'll go outside for a second and try and join. Go on, you can.
Just the technology hates us, so it's trying to the technology hates us. Okay, and then there's the keeping men out of women's sports. Okay. Go. That also is now, more pending appeals. So it's like just every inch of the way we've had to fight, and it's not over. Like I know Trump is in the White House and all of this, but it just is not over. And I just want all of us to understand that this battle is going to continue for a long time. We have to be this from the long haul. The only one we don't know about a legal challenge is this one that ends the funding for K through 12 schools. That one, we can't find a challenge to that one. So maybe we'll see more progress on that one before the others. So and these cases are really expensive, and it's hard. Like it can cost $1 million to put one of these cases if you get all the way up. So we just need help. We need funding, we need lawyers, some lawyers, guns and money, like we just need it all. So this was the Childs case. This one was heard last Tuesday before the Supreme Court. So it got all the way up there. This was one that was about the, quote, medical sex interventions and gender affirming care for children. This is a therapist in Colorado who wants to help children who are distressed about their bodies, distressed about their sex. And Colorado has one of these laws that tries to ban what they call the conversion therapy, which at the time, seems like a good idea. You don't want gays and lesbians to be forced to undergo these terrible things that have happened throughout history. So that was a good idea, but this, of course, has been interpreted to mean that a child is born trans, and anything that questions that is now conversion therapy. So this therapist, Kaylee Childs, said that she was brave enough to say, I'm going to take this to court. I want to be able to help children who are in distress about their bodies. So, so the therapists have been stuck. They can only affirm distress and delusion. And Colorado can show no study that shows that voluntary counseling causes harm, but it forbids children and their parents from having those conversations. So Wolf argued that, quote, gender identity erases women and girls, and that same-sex attracted people from the law and from policy, and it jeopardizes our mental health. So that was, you know, that was our argument before the Supreme Court. Another case was the Mahmoud case. So this was a public school, and they parents wanted to opt out of some of these lessons that were either hypersexual in nature, they didn't like them, or that were teaching that gender identity is a fact, that everybody has one, that you might have the wrong one. And there were lots of books in the public school library that, you know, were showing that perspective. And the parents wanted to opt out, and the school wouldn't let them. So the Supreme Court decided with the parents, and it stated that the government, that it burdens the parents' religious exercise to require children to participate in the instruction. From our brief, of course, the reason we submitted a brief is that we just didn't want it to be religious arguments. A lot of these cases are brought by Christians from a very right-wing perspective, and they don't have the same arguments that we have. And it's not that I don't support parents and children, you know, being able to have their own religion and whatever, but these are not radical feminist arguments. So we always try to get a brief in there if we can that makes the feminist argument about why this is hurting children. So we said gender ideology has been promoted as progressive, but it is in fact a regressive approach to sex stereotypes and homosexuality. Indoctrinating children in the ideology in school promotes social harms to vulnerable groups by leading often troubled children to question their sex, by subverting the basis for necessary sex segregation, and by confounding the meaning of same-sex attraction. This is not a grassroots civil rights movement, but an astroturf project that has been successful, generating approximately in the United States $1.2 billion in 2002 for surgical procedures alone. So we got that in there. We get these kinds of things in front of the court. We're trying to set precedent in any way we can, but again, we're just trying to get radical feminist arguments somehow into the public record and into, you know, the sort of flow of these legal arguments, so other people can quote us if it's there. And this was the Scrimeti case. So this one feels like, oh, great, it's a win. It's not really for feminists. I mean, it's good that they said the states can ban hormones and surgery for children. I'm glad to at least have that, but they didn't do it for feminist reasons. The plaintiffs argued that this constituted sex-based discrimination and thus violated the protection clause. So this was a law in Tennessee. So Tennessee argued that the law did not treat people differently based on their sex, but it was about their age and their medical condition. And the court agreed that this had nothing to do with sex, that it was about their age and their medical condition. And Roberts also emphasized that this was not a ruling on transgender rights. So they kicked the can down the road. This is what they keep doing. No one actually has really ruled on the substance of what the problem is here. They just said, yeah, the states actually have a compelling interest in this. They should be protecting children, and that's fine. You can do that in Tennessee, and they stopped it there. But this was from our amicus brief. No child is born in the wrong body. Okay, we're trying to get this argument out there. There is no class of transgender children. Okay, it doesn't exist. And there's no right under the Equal Protection Clause of the United States Constitution for such children to be subjected to medical interventions to modify their sex traits. So I feel like that's a compelling argument, and it's our argument. And then we had this. So this wasn't about trans. This is other things that we're doing. We are trying to do other things, which is very exciting. We are fighting pornography. We are fighting surrogacy. We're actually having a good time getting back to the stuff we were doing 20 years ago, before my life revolved around explaining to grown-ups where babies come from. I'm a little tired of it. So I'm really glad we can do things that are about pornography and violence against women. So this is a big one, Free Speech Coalition versus Paxton. We are having some success in the United States with age verification laws. These are not perfect pieces of feminist legislation. This is not what I would have put forward, but other groups did, and it worked. And so we are for it now because it's better than nothing. Like, don't let the perfect video be the good and all that. So what these laws do is, in order to access Pornhub, you have to prove that you're over 18. And the way this works is proving that you're over 18 means it automatically goes to the Department of Motor Vehicles, where you get your driver's license. Well, the moment that men see that they're going to have to go through the DMV, they freak out and they exit the site. They press escape and they're done. And they do not go online and look at pornography. So it has actually stopped a great number of harms from happening because it stops men from accessing porn by simply saying, you're going to have to prove who you are. And they don't want to do it. It takes away the anonymity. So we have the accessibility and the anonymity. And that is what has made porn explode across the internet. We're taking away the anonymity, or at least they feel like we are. And that's enough. So there have been some good battles here in the United States about these laws, and we're all for it because it actually is working. And we won at the Supreme Court. This happened in June. They said this is not actually the argument was it's a burden. It's a burden. It's too high of a burden against the First Amendment to make men verify who they are. And the Supreme Court ruled that actually no. That the harm, that the potential harm to children outweighs the slight burden that is placed on men when they're looking for porn, and that they did have a real compelling interest in protecting children from these harms. They acknowledge that there are harms to children, at least when there's porn involved. So our group said the severity of the harms to children requires state safeguarding action. Young women report that exposure to pornography creates difficulty refusing consent for, quote, unwanted or humiliating sexual practices. It monetizes child rape, revenge pornography, spy cam videos of women showering, racist and misogynist content, and footage of women being asphyxiated in plastic bags. This isn't our brief for the Supreme Court, so go read our briefs. We make great arguments. They're radical feminist arguments. There's a lot more that I can say, but I am out of time. So Wolf is doing great stuff. We love working with WDI USA. We actually have great coalition effort. Every Monday we have our stuff where we have a phone call where we talk about all of the pending legislation and the public policy stuff and what we can do about it. And it's not just about the trans issue. It's about things like pornography and surrogacy. And there's other coalition partners that we're working with. So there's a lot of really great groups now in the United States. And we're tiny. We're just a little tiny David, and there's these giant Goliaths, but we have really good game, and we really need it. So it might be small, but we have a lot of force, and we're aiming those like shots. So we're going to hit those Goliaths one by one. So join us, join WDI, join Wolf, join whichever group you like, and help us because we need your help. And it's great. So yay, we are making progress. We are, and it's a very. I feel very hopeful about all of these things. Even the porn issue, we are making progress. So good on us. And I will shut up now and turn it over to Elizabeth.
Brilliant. So that's great. So Sheila, would you like to go next? Yeah. I think that's great. And then, so we're going to hear from Elizabeth. Not Elizabeth, about the book that Sheila's just published, Uprooting Male Domination. So over to you, Sheila.
Thanks. I was just listening to Lierre there, talking about children being strangled in plastic bags, sort of plastic bags. It reminded me about 1982. I went to Amsterdam. There was a women's conference, supposedly a women's conference. A lot of us went. There's about 30 of us from the sort of revolutionary feminism, and we were all in the anti-pornography struggle. We arrived.
Sheila, it's going to have to be louder.
Sorry. Yeah, so we went to Amsterdam for a conference in 1982, about 30 of us from the anti-pornography struggle in London. We arrived at the building the conference was going to be in, we walked into the main hall. There were photographs, art photographs, along both sides of the wall. The photographs were of a woman's child, a little girl, probably about 7 or 8 years old, smothered in plastic bags. Along both walls.
Okay, we're just going to have to halt for a minute because they can't hear.
Okay,
so sorry. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move, the camera's still here, but I'm going to move the laptop. And that, sorry, the camera's going to move, but move the laptop. Sorry, everybody at home. We're just going to get it so that you can hear better, given that there's 135 people at home who can't hear. I don't know if you're at home, people, but we'll make it, excuse this bit, but it's better for you to be able to hear than not. So, well, some people get a table, just put it there. Well, the table would be better, probably, because it just would be better. That table back there.
That's really loud, that little table. I think this with books might be better.
Well, no, because it's only for this mic. Anyway, it's okay. No, it's okay. Actually, it doesn't matter. But it would be. It just is going to be in the way a little bit. Okay, so that's. I just need to now. Yes. Okay. Could somebody work on the getting the camera aimed in the right direction? I'm just going to make sure the mic is. So just make it aimed on us. I'll just make sure that the audio is coming off. Okay, right. I think now the sound should be coming off this laptop, so you should be able to hear it. Microphone. Yes, I think it's this. Fine. Okay, now somebody with this. The microphone is here, Sheila.
I will just briefly repeat what I was saying, maybe. So I was listening to Lierre and talking about children being funneled in plastic bags, and that reminded me that in 1982 I went to a conference in Amsterdam, a women's conference. There were about 30 of us from London. The conference posters all over Amsterdam city centre were of a tall, full, naked woman with her hands tied behind her back, and the photographs were of her from the back. So this was a supposed feminist conference in Amsterdam. We walked through the front door, both sides of the walls in the corridor were covered in photographs of a 7-year-old little girl, naked, being smothered by plastic. The photographs were apparently taken by her mother. The conference was full of sadomasochism. One of the workshops was a man pretending to be a woman who had his thumb and index finger tied together. That was a symbol, apparently, tied together. I know, crazy stuff. And he was teaching sadomasochism. He actually said to us all in the room, how many of you have masochistic fantasies? Because that's the point at which we would then say all these women were masochistic. But we'd actually planned. We sat on a traffic island in the middle of Amsterdam and we planned what we would say. So when the man with the strange fingers tied together said, how many of you have masochistic fantasies? All of us from London said, yes. So 30 of us from London said, yes, we all do. And we think that's a problem and we want to do something about it. So at least that stopped that workshop, right? But that was happening in 82. I just think sometimes a little bit of history in terms of the horror that we seem to be having now need to be understood. And that was supposedly feminist, that was a feminist conference. There was also a man playing the music for women to dance, dressed in women's clothes. Okay, so sorry, I'll just get back to what I was actually going to talk about, which is the paper is called, and it's very brief really, it's Riding on the Back of the Crocodile, Women's Sex-Based Rights and the Rise of the Right. So I want to start just by saying that on October the 7th, Tuesday this week, it was the second anniversary of the massacre and mass rape that men from Hamas and their friends carried out against Jewish women, children and men in Israel. Now, in Melbourne, I discovered, the city I lived in for 25 years, and on the street Brunswick Street that I lived on, Jew haters put up graffiti and posters that day to celebrate what was done on October the 7th. One said, October the 7th, do it again. And another said, glory to Hamas. Now, Melbourne is a sophisticated, tolerant, multicultural city with a high standard of education. I did not imagine that in my lifetime I would see Jew hating like this, and certainly not in that city. So you may say, what has this got to do with what we normally talk about here, women's sex-based rights? Well, this is just one example of how much the political landscape has changed, and it continues to change very fast. Even in the last 7 years since we wrote the Declaration, we're in a very different and quite frightening historical moment right now, particularly in the US, of course, which our US sisters are extremely aware of. So the picture I had in mind for the title of this talk is one that I've seen online of a crocodile sliding through a swamp with a white egret on its back. And the picture looks scary because the difference in power looks huge, and at any moment you imagine that the reptile will snap its jaws and ingest the heron. The heron, though, does gain from which though does gain an organizations. So what I'm talking about today is the problem of working for women's sex-based rights at a time when there is a huge rightward turn in politics and some women are seeking an advantage from that turn. So the huge problem that we face from the beginning of our struggle, and we talked about this with great distress from the beginning often, is the way that all sides of left-wing politics sought to attach themselves to the transgender politics which so attacked and threatened women's rights. Those of us from the left, as were mostly all of those involved originally and now in the WDI, were entirely threatened, but we did not, as a result, move to the right of politics. Some, however, did. From the beginning of WDI in 2018, we've worked as a pretty broad coalition of feminists in this organization, and we've worked very successfully. Many of us were from the old left, and many too were from the traditional right wing, conservative forces like the Tories in the UK or the traditional Republicans in the US. We worked with those women who actually supported our declaration, had feminist sex-based rights understandings as we did, and we've enjoyed working with those women. All of us have been feminists. We have discussed all the way through whether there were some potential allies whose politics in terms of women's rights and human rights were so far to the right that we could not reasonably make alliances with them. Now, some of those working with the WDI, like Dansky, have shown much political nous and chosen, in the absence of any interest in or coverage from the left of politics, to be interviewed by right-wing chat show hosts. And this, I think it's a great initiative and has gained really important advances, really. But appearing on the rallies of the extreme right and supporting their politics is something entirely different, and probably not something that we could have imagined that any gender-critical activists would do a few years ago. Certainly, I never imagined that. I don't think any of us knew how far right the right would go, or imagined that some of those who were in the broad gender-critical movement would move to support the election of Donald Trump, as some did and do now. And in fact, there were women from the gender-critical movement who said, vote for Trump, and actually supported Trump getting elected in the US, which was extraordinary to many of us. And now, when his agenda for the US and for women has become extremely dangerous, we had no idea that they would move, as some of them in the UK, as some have in the UK, to strongly and publicly support a man named Tommy Robinson, who was adopted and funded by the US right, by something called Rebel News. I don't really know what all these organizations are, but that's an organization which funds the development of the extreme right around the world. It's now clear in this second Trump term just how dangerous this administration is to democracy, to human rights, and particularly to women's sex-based rights. There are innumerable examples of the state violence and abuses being carried out in the US, and I don't want to go through all of that. The violence is pretty terrible. And the ways in which the rules which underpin the normal working of the state and the rule of law are being subverted or destroyed. There's no way, except in relation to transgenderism, iteration of the American right can be good for women's rights. And it's just one example of that, because I really don't want to go into it, that has interested me because I'm an academic, is that grant applications which mention the word woman are currently being rejected out of hand. I think that's kind of extraordinary. All my life we were trying to get women onto grant applications, being able to get research about them. So that gives some indication of the political fate that women are beginning to experience with this administration. I don't know what is happening in the US, but in the UK, some well-known gender-critical women who don't necessarily call themselves feminist, but who many assumed were so, are attaching themselves to this outpost of the far right in this country, which is Tommy Robinson, sorry. These women attended the Tommy Robinson march a couple of weeks ago. There was no feminist content at the march. The leader, Tommy Robinson, is an ex-football hooligan who spent 18 months in prison in relation to his activism against refugees and against Islam. Now, at that march, Elon Musk gave a talk online to the march in which he had already helped finance the march and did an online speech. And he wanted, he said, a dissolution of parliament and a change of government. So this is a far-right entity in the US trying to undermine and destroy the democratic government of Britain. Now, it's a pretty extraordinary situation that we've got into. He said that if the current state of affairs in UK politics continued, violence is going to come to you, you will have no choice, you're in a fundamental situation here, and so on. And he says, whether you choose violence or not, violence is coming to you, you either fight back or you die. That's the truth, I think. So this is richest man in the world, far-right America. Now, it looks like a speech that's inciting a violent uprising in a peaceful democracy, and this matters. Such an uprising of male violence would be fundamentally dangerous to women and children, and indeed the whole tenor of this politics is already making life much more difficult for democracy, for women and children, and so on. So the gender-critical women who've fallen in with the far right have now adopted and politically promote Robinson's anti-Islam policies, for instance. That is really spreading, really spreading. When gender-critical women support the far right, ostensibly because the left are useless and the only way to make political progress on the issue of transgenderism is through the extreme right, they are playing a dangerous game. The game is not just dangerous democratic politics, but to all of women's state-based rights. The religious advisors around Trump's court in the US promote the removal of women's fundamental rights. They argue that women should not have the vote and women should not work outside the home. Incredible stuff, like back to the 1950s. Of course, they do not believe that women should be able to get abortions. The conservative political influencer, Charlie Kirk, who was close to Trump, and recently, he had a 10-year-old daughter who became pregnant after being raped. He would force her to bear the child. Now, ideas which have been unthinkable and unmentionable in mainstream politics since the 1950s are thinkable now. These are very extreme ideas which spell disaster for women's political existence. A great deal more can be said, but this is just a very short talk today. I'm sure this issue is being talked about in all those countries in which WDI is working and which there is a rise of the far right, and that's certainly Germany, it's certainly the US, it's certainly now the UK. And we need to keep this conversation going because that might make it easier for us to sleep at night, and because knowledge is power. So let's keep talking about this and how it is affecting us.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sheila. I'm just going to move the camera a little bit in because it looks like we don't need it quite that far out. And turn it a bit that way. Right, we're now going to here, we're going to be able to talk about this in the room here, but we're going to do all the talks first, and then we are going to have a bit of a chat up until 4:30 UK time, so we've got about 45 minutes from now. I can see from reading the chat that there's a lot of discussion going on about some of the issues that have been raised, and I think it's great that we have got a space where we're meeting internationally as well as us, incredibly luckily, in the room, but we are thinking about these issues, and we might sometimes disagree or often disagree, which is fair enough, but we are managing to have some discussion, which is good. So we're now going to go to Elizabeth Miller, who's going to talk about Sheila Jeffrey's new book, Uprooting Male Domination. And actually, just before we start, I'll say that we had a Wolf, Spin Effects and WDI organised a official side event last night, and we had over 200 women coming to hear this fantastic event. Sold 55 copies of Sheila's book, and we had comedy and book. But anyway, over to you now, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Well, thank you for your talk, Sheila. As usual, Sheila is ahead of the curve in connecting what is happening in the world and various political developments to feminism and how it all impacts women, which is a good segue into talking about her new book, Uprooting Male Domination. I am very pleased to have the honor of introducing Sheila's new book on feminist question time. It's published by Spin Effects Press in 2025, and it's called Uprooting Male Domination. And it's a collection of speeches that Sheila has given at various feminist conferences and other feminist gatherings since 2020 at WIM, Radical Feminists, that Thistle Peterson and I organized in Chicago. And since then, Sheila has contributed a chapter to a radical feminist anthology that I edited in 2021 called Spinning and Weaving, Radical Feminism for the 21st Century. And I've also had the pleasure of co-presenting with Sheila at numerous Radical Feminist Perspectives webinars, which is, of course, a series of weekly webinars that's put together by WDI over the last, I think, 5 years or so. As you all know, Sheila has written many books since 1984, including my favorite, Sister and Her Enemies, maybe queer politics, the industrial man's dominion, the rise of religion and the eclipse of women's rights, beauty and misogyny, harmful cultural practices in the West, gender hurts, the lesbian revolution, and penile imperialism, the male sex right, and women's subordination. And I had to leave some out for purposes of time. So she's written many books, and the newest one is Uprooting Male Domination, this new collection of talks that she's given over the past 15 years. So I'm delighted to be able to give an introduction and a little bit of an overview of the book. It has 4 main parts: the nuts and bolts of male domination, the prostitution and reproductive technology industries, challenging gender identity politics, and lesbian feminist politics. And under each of those sections, there are several talks that she's given at various times that address different aspects of these broad topics or subjects. So for each of these parts of the book, I'm going to either focus on a particular talk that she gave and kind of summarize it a little bit or give some commentary on it, or in other situations, I'm going to kind of sum up all of the talks in that area in terms of what I think some of Sheila's insights are in that group of talks. So in the section called the nuts and bolts of male domination, the first talk was called Femininity as the Behavior of Subordination. There are also 3 other talks in that section: what is wrong with equality, the problem of free speech, and why is it so hard to talk about sex? I'm going to talk just a little bit about her 2024 talk, Femininity as the Behavior of Subordination. In this talk, Sheila has the very important insight that femininity is not a natural component of being a woman, but is a taught and imposed collection of behaviors of subordination that are imposed on women to maintain male dominance and to maintain patriarchal control. Women are taught essentially from birth and also coerced to engage in behaviors that show submission to men. Such as the way that we dress, the way we speak to men, the fact that we're taught to center and give care to men and their feelings at all times, and the fact that we're taught to signal sexual attractiveness to men and signal that we submit or will submit to male sexual advances and control. All of these are behaviors of subordination that are taught and imposed by patriarchy. And in some ways, as I was reading this book, in some ways, I felt that Sheila's insights about the functions of femininity in society, these behaviors of subordination, in some ways tied together all of her theoretical structure regarding all the other feminist topics she explores, because society's actions of teaching women to engage in the behaviors of subordination and coercing women and girls to do so create the societal structure and institutions that enable men to access women for sexual use in marriage, in prostitution, in pornography, to use us to produce children who will be future laborers in the capitalist system and for future property inheritance, and to exclude us from political and economic power and public life. I'll now go on to talk a little bit about the talk, just a small comment about the talk, What is Wrong with Equality, from 2023. And here, what I took away from this talk is that equality under a system that doesn't account for women's needs will not actually liberate women. And that is what is wrong with a feminist project that says it's about gaining equality. Feminists' ultimate goals should not be to give women access to the inherently unequal and inherently oppressive system that already exists by simply giving women a seat at a patriarchal table. Rather, the feminist project should be to transform the societal structure entirely, to liberate women from living in an inherently subordinate role in an inherently hierarchical patriarchal system. And so I think that's a really brilliant way of summing up what the problem is with saying that feminism is just about getting equality for women. Because getting equality in an inherently rotten system should not be our goal. That is much too small a goal for women. And in fact, what we should be trying to do is change the system and liberate women from it. I'm going to go on now to talk a bit about the section of the book called The Prostitution and Reproductive Technology Industries. And there are 4 talks in this section, and I'll kind of sum up what I took away from collectively reading all 4 of these talks. The impact of pornography on democracy through its impact on women's participation in civil society is a big part of what I took away. The pornography industry has created a propaganda of women hating on a mass international scale. Pornography is the foundation of the global prostitution industry. Pornography and prostitution are not separable, since, as Catherine McKinnon also pointed out, a lot of pornography is made by filming women who are coerced into sex or engaged in prostitution. So they're really not separable industries. They're very much interwoven, and many of the same men profit from both, as well as from human trafficking. Porn and prostitution is a massive industry that is an integral part of global capitalism. And it is so legally through strip clubs and also in countries where prostitution is legal. Sheila points out that pornography is a form of prostitution. It's film prostitution. The basis of the sex industry is the sale and exchange of women's bodies for men's sexual and reproductive use. It also includes the surrogacy industry. And I think this is an insight of Sheila's that most people don't have and don't think about, but that the surrogacy industry is also related to the prostitution and human trafficking industries because it is another way in which men pay to access women's bodies for their use. Also related to these industries, all of these things are related in a very complex web. Also related to these industries are arranged marriage, child marriage, and the international trafficking of women as mail order brides. And Sheila is one of the few people I've seen, including feminists, one of the few feminists I've seen, to show these connections and show that marriage and the sex industry have the same foundation, that being the creation of a system where men can access women as resources for both sexual purposes and to create profit. So rather than being opposites, marriage and the sex industry are really part of the same system. Sheila also discusses the impact of the very great ubiquity of pornography and the way that it has shaped men's thinking in recent times, and how that impacts democracy. And one particular example she gives is the way that it impacts the experience of women parliamentarians. So she discusses the thousands and thousands of rape and death threats that women parliamentarians have received across Europe, which is something I wasn't really aware of. But apparently, anytime women parliamentarians speak out against things that men disagree with, they subsequently receive many, many rape and death threats. So obviously that is going to have an impact on how willing women are to even enter the political system and attempt to become legislators or attempt to enter any kind of political office. Sheila also theorizes that the huge porn consumption, which statistics show that 70 to 80% of men regularly consume porn, is creating the male rage that is leading to the rise of the extreme right-wing movements. And one thing that she points to as evidence here is the fact that militaries actually systematically use pornography. They show the troops pornography in order to create aggression in troops. So this is a practice that's been around for quite a long time. So I will now go on to talk a bit about the section called Challenging Gender Identity Politics. And this section of the book contains chapters or talks describing how men have worked to replace the movement for the liberation of an oppressed class, women, from oppression based on our sex. They've moved to replace that with a movement to establish a right of males to publicly act out their sexual excitement from dressing up as and pretending to be that oppressed class of women. And this movement has been called the movement to protect transgender porn, of which there is an enormous amount on the internet. Apparently, at least 10% of all pornography is transgender pornography. The problem for women is that these men demand to be seen as actual women, meaning that not only must everyone call them she, but even more worrisomely, they must be admitted to women's bathrooms, women's locker rooms, women's prisons, and allowed to compete for women's sporting events, women's scholarships, political shortlists for parliament positions, etc. Also, these men are virulently against free speech, issuing rape and death threats, job firings, and as well as physical attacks on women who refuse to pretend that these men are women. The movement also harms lesbian and gay young people in that it tells them that they are the opposite sex if they don't perform the stereotypical social roles assigned to their sex, leading many to seek wrong sex hormones and removal of breasts and sex organs. And the fact that transgender porn is 1/10 of global pornography, at least, along with the huge profitable industry of selling cross-sex hormones and so-called gender-affirming surgery, means that transgenderism is part of the global prostitution industry and a large contributor to global capitalism. So again, we see how Sheila brings together all these threads of various things and has insights about their connections that we don't often hear from other quarters. The last section of the book is called Lesbian Feminist Politics. And here I'm going to focus on her October 2024 expert witness statement on behalf of the Lesbian Action Group's case before the case concerned the right of lesbians to meet without the presence of men who pretend to be lesbians. The Lesbian Action Group, the LAG, had requested an exemption from the Australian Human Rights Commission in order to be permitted to hold lesbian-only meetings at Melbourne's Pride Centre. The Human Rights Commission denied the request. Sheila testified at the appeal, and that appeal also failed, with the effect that lesbians in Australia from their events. Sheila's testimony explained why LAG wants lesbian-only space, why men want to be in lesbian spaces, and the conflict between lesbians' political interests and the perceived political interests of men who want to invade women-only spaces. The so-called political interests of these men are actually their interest in getting access to women-only space, to both to help them act out their sexual fetish of pretending to be women, and also to get access to lesbians because it is part of their fetish to violate lesbians' privacy boundaries. Other pieces in this section of the book include Sheila's theorizing on lesbian ethics, queer theory, and politics as being the politics, culture, and sexual interests of gay men, and in direct opposition to the goals of lesbian feminism. This section of the book also includes a talk on the origins of lesbian feminism. As a whole, Uprooting Male Domination provides a survey of Sheila's lesbian feminist theory in 4 major areas of feminist theory that she's been interested in over the past 15 years, and illustrates her enormous contributions to the women's liberation movement in those last 15 years. So thank you, Sheila, for these talks.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for summarising the book. But I think hopefully everybody will get a copy and read it as well. So that's great, and it's doing really well as a book. So I'm now going to give my talk, and then we'll have a little bit of time for chatting. So, and for sort of questions or anything. So, right. Shooting ourselves in the foot. Why do women's organisations so often silence radical feminist voices? Sadly, the feminist movement is not a big, mutually supportive sisterhood, working with our diverse understandings and methods to overthrow patriarchy. Instead, it is a muddle of competing, mutually distrustful micro-organisations, many of which think they are good and the others are bad. And the most bad, according to many women's organisations, are the radical feminists. Why do organisations of feminists consider us so bad? And why do they exclude and silence us, thereby weakening women as a sex class in our battle against male domination? Why does the movement shun its most effective revolutionaries? I would say this is a form of collective self-harm in order to get male approval. Radical feminist ideas must be outlawed by the patriarchy, wants them outlawed because they are a threat to patriarchy. Patriarchal men know this and have long excluded us from positions of power in political parties, unions, the media, academia. Once they found out what women's studies in universities was teaching young women, the patriarchs death rolled it into gender studies and then reversed it via queer theory into an attack on radical feminists. The present iteration of this attempt to vilify is the attempt to vilify radical feminists with the slur TERF. They want to silence every woman's inner radical feminist and cut off radical feminist ideas that live within all women by pretending the ideas are hate speech. Trans rights activists call everyone who stands against them a TERF, which sends women who never saw themselves as even feminists rushing to find out what TERF stands for. Knowing that patriarchs really hate radical feminists, most women's organisations are afraid that if they express radical feminist views, they'll be cancelled and ostracised. They're concerned that if they platform any radical feminists, they will be tarred with the same brush. They want to create a clear differentiation between radical feminists and themselves. Patriarchy brandishes a stick at radical feminists, so women are afraid to be labelled rad fem. So radical feminists are silenced by women's organisations who are seeking patriarchal approval, and the organisations do this by not inviting us to speak at their conferences, not giving us platforms on podcasts, not publishing our books, not citing us in the feminist books that do get published, and by pretending radical feminism has died already. It's a historic thing. It's not us, they say. We are not the really bad ones. We're the nice, kind feminists. So that's what a lot of women's organisations are doing. And then there's the carrot. Patriarchy offers a reward to its good, tame, useful feminists. Some women help directly by promoting patriarchal values such as family, femininity, or submission to God the Father. Others help patriarchy by joining the fight against radical feminists. The ideas and methods developed by radical feminists are the most potent threat to patriarchy, so covering them up is great for the patriarchs. In fact, I would argue there's a new profession, and it's been thrown up recently, called Silencer of Radical Feminism, or SORF. This is a very specialist profession demanding sophisticated political understanding and skills. These professional political misleaders have to be able to understand and learn from radical feminist thinking, use the ideas, but not credit radical feminists. For instance, the term sex-based rights was invented by Sheila Jeffries in 2017 and first used in the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights in 2018. It was never used before. We have been fighting for women's sex-based rights, but the actual phrase to sum up clearly what we're trying to do as a sex class was needed at that time and was developed or thought up by Sheila, but it has not been credited. It's since been adopted and used by many women's organisations, but its origin is unacknowledged. So, for instance, the Filio website for this weekend's conference, for instance, says, meet the women who are challenging sex-based injustices across the world. But it doesn't admit, but don't come and meet the woman who invented the term. It doesn't say that, even though they could very well celebrate the useful invention of this term at this conference and credit, just acknowledge that somebody made it up, it came from somewhere. As with many tasks in the patriarchy, being a SORF, or a silencer of radical feminists, is well recompensed, with seats at tables, grants, book deals. There's a thriving industry of feminists obfuscating, denying, unaliving radical feminism. Token feminist academics get grants to rewrite her story, to make out that radical feminism petered out in the early 1980s, and has been replaced by other forms of feminism like gender critical feminism. A-level students, that's 18-year-old students in schools, in high school, in Britain, they learn about the safely dead radical feminists like Kate Millett and Mary Daly, but they never learn about those who are alive and kicking. Same in university libraries. University feminist sections, I recently went to one and looked through a huge feminist section in a university library, and nothing radical feminist. It has been very, very carefully removed by these highly sophisticated silencers of radical feminism. Say, oh, by mistake, it just happened, we lost all those books. They're key books, and it's very, very careful. They know what they are, and they get rid of them. There are no chairs of radical feminism in any universities. There are no courses in radical feminism that you can get a university qualification for. The job that is being done by SORF academics is the hiding and covering up, the rewriting, the revision of our story. Another reason that we are silenced by many women and organisations is that many women, so this is different, they think that radical feminism diverts us from the real struggle. The working classes against the rich, as feminists, they argue and probably believe that women should work with the labour movement to struggle for better working conditions, whereas radical feminists argue that women should stop working with men and fight the sex class struggle against our oppressors, the men. Women who argue, like the socialist feminists, they probably do believe it, but it's also really useful for them because they get recognition, they get carrots, they get jobs, they get grants, they get support from their socialist brothers. They get the political sort of support to be able to run large conferences, particularly in Britain. The socialist feminists have been able to run massive conferences over a long time, and so you can see they're thinking, well, we're doing something useful, we're running a massive conference for feminism, so they think it's worth it. The price they pay is the silencing of radical feminists, but they think, well, it's worth it because we're running a massive conference. The women silencing radical feminism are often defensive about this silencing they do. They say they did read the radical feminist books, but they didn't feel they needed to reference them, or they just didn't have space for them in the programme. All around for feminists once or did or sat next to somebody, and then they said, that's why we're excluding you. Silencing radical feminists is the quid pro quo to get a bigger platform. It's the nasty bit, the sacrifice your sisters bit. It's the suck this up if you want an academic job. It's the unspoken, denied implementation of patriarchy's imperative to eliminate radical feminists and radical feminist ideas. I've talked to socialist feminists who justify their ostracisation of us, and they say they consider it a strategic, a first step. Let's not scare the horses. Some have said, yes, of course, I agree with you. I agree with radical feminist ideas. Your point was right that, we shouldn't, for instance, we know that these people are not men when they were platforming men who said they were women. We know that, but strategically, we just don't want to say that. So in private, they might say they agree with radical feminist ideas, but they think it's strategic because they can get somewhere better. They say it's an unfortunate necessity, it's a subplot, it's collateral damage. We are the collateral damage in order to get a bigger platform, larger conferences, to get the ideas into the mainstream. I would argue it's not that. I think
that silencing radical feminists is the plot. That is the thing. So it's the opposite of just unfortunate, sorry, we have to silence you. Just understand, be polite about it, because we need the big thing. We need the book. We need the conference. We need the support of parties. I actually think the patriarchs want them to do that silencing, and they want to mislead the women and make sure whatever happens, that the young women in the universities can't see radical feminism, the politicized ones coming to big conferences can't see radical feminism. That is the main point. It's not the subplot, it's the plot. Okay. Another quite different reason some women's organizations dissociate themselves from radical feminists is that we want to overthrow patriarchy and they don't. So some women's organizations actually don't. Many women have basically made their peace with patriarchy. They have a nice husband, a nice son, nice brother, or a rather comfortable house that they get from being unchallenging to some man. They have a stake in the continuation of patriarchy, so they see us as a threat. In line with this, some women sideline us because they actually think radical feminists and feminism is bad. That we are, so these are more the sort of woke women. We are bad trans exclusionaries. We're killing the poor, long-suffering young men who have been sent to save us from conservative values and gender conformity. So there's a range of different reasons. Some people actually do that. Well, we know they believe that. Now, we've looked at the reasons why many people in organisations reject radical feminism. What is to be done? I suggest their repudiation of us is a mistake and it weakens the movement. Without the sharing of radical feminist ideas, those ideas will die, which is the aim of patriarchy. If first they come for the TERFs, clearly the gender criticals will be next. Let's unite and fight. We have the best, clearest theories, the rad feminists do, that have stood the test of time. Radical feminists have got to the root of the matter. And we have seen the functioning of patriarchy. We've described it and we know how to uproot it. Read Sheila's new book and join us, the rad feminists, but we would like to be a useful party or need to work the really gritty, experienced, tough revolutionaries in the sisterhood. The rest of the movement is just weakening itself. I think we're shooting ourselves in the foot. So I would say we will be more powerful together, the whole movement. We should include all the different types of feminisms, and radical feminism should be right at the centre, or at least part of the big movements. I think it's a massive error, and yeah, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. Okay. We've done the talk. Thank you very much. You can see lots of little claps coming up. So we've got not much time, but let's maybe go around again and say if we've got anything to say. I know we haven't got time for a long chat, but Cara, what do you think?
Yeah, so something Lierre said, I was going to talk about, but didn't really have time in my talk, about the lack of radical feminist analysis before the courts. And it reminded me that, and it's important for everyone to understand this history, women did not have equal protection of the laws until 1971. And the only reason we got it in 1971 is because a woman named Ruth Bader Ginsburg fought for it. She saw inequality happening, she saw unfairness happening, and she fought so hard to get us acknowledged as persons. Literally, the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment says no person shall be deprived of equal protection of the laws. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg got up there in a case, this is when she was a lawyer for the ACLU, which is a separate story. And she got up before the Supreme Court and she said, listen, men, women are people, and we count under the Equal Protection Clause. And so the body of jurisprudence has evolved since 1971, and that's how we ended up with this quasi-suspect classification. Laws that unfairly discriminate against one sex are bad. Laws that fairly discriminate between the sexes are good. And I say all of that to say, if the Supreme Court does what
think it's not going to do, and calls transgender status a quasi-suspect class, that will be so bad for women and girls. And I just really hope the Supreme Court does the right thing in these upcoming court cases. I also just wanted to say a little bit, and I know we have to move on. I want to set the context for the first time I went on Tucker Carlson, which was in 2016. And now I'm going to sort of lovingly throw Lierre under the bus, because I didn't get that invitation as myself. The invitation came to Wolf, and the Fox News people made it clear they wanted someone who could physically be in a studio in either New York or DC. And I was the only one on the board at the time who fit that criteria. And we had a big discussion, and I was like, I do not want to do this. And this one made me, she just made me do it. And I have no regrets about that. And if I had not gone on Tucker Carlson then, I would never have been able to go on later. And one of my Tucker Carlson appearances is why the book publisher of The Abolition of Sex reached out to me and invited me to write The Abolition of Sex. And that book was intended to give people on the political left, normie Dems, some language for understanding this, some language to use, some context for understanding the leftist critique of gender identity, because otherwise they don't want to talk about it because they look like a bunch of Republicans and they're afraid of looking like Republicans. So it was only because of that that I was even able to do that. And I think that that has done some work. I don't know how much, but it's done some work to getting rank and file Democrats willing to say out loud that, you know, they think women and girls exist as a sex class.
That's right. I think that's right.
Yeah.
It worked.
Yeah. So
Also, when she went on Tucker Carlson, the Wolf website got over 1 million hits that hour, and it was so bad it crashed. I mean, so good it crashed. Our website couldn't handle, never had that kind of traffic before. So this is like 1 million women who have never heard an actual feminist speak, who were like, what in the world is this? It's this thing called Wolf. Let's look it up. And there it is. The front page is like a definition of radical feminism and what we're fighting. So this is a bunch of women who've never had exposure to this. And I will always say that was a positive good. I don't care. I want every woman to have feminism. And I don't think that's a weird thing to want if you're a radical feminist.
okay, and communicating radical feminism to conservatives isn't a bad thing.
It's a great thing. All women need radical feminism. Like, I'm not budging from this, people. Every woman needs to hear this, and we should take any means to get it to them. I don't know why this is weird. Like, of course she went on. It's huge that she got on. It was amazing. We had a radical feminist on television. It's like never happened in my lifetime, except like twice. So
There's a lot
Yeah,
of
it's great.
confusion though, because there are people who see simply going on that show as being somehow working with the right.
Right. And when those people get me an invitation from MSNBC or CNN or an interview with the New York Times, I will take that anytime.
I mean, you are not supporting them and helping the right
Right.
by going on there. You are helping feminists and us.
Right.
That's a very different thing from being on a march to support the extreme right, for instance. I mean, it's so different. I think there is confusion, unfortunately. Maybe deliberate confusion sometimes.
Yeah.
I guess I would like to say how much I liked your piece, Joe. I'm just sitting here thinking about it. I think you're right that I liked what you said at the beginning, that women who are sort of afraid to go all the way into radical feminism, it's because they think that they will get carrots from the patriarchy if they're not too bad. They're kind of skirting this edge of being, well, we have some things to say, but you know, we don't hate men. Like, I always think it's really interesting when feminists say, well, we're feminists, but we don't hate men. Like, they're afraid to, well, you know, like, I hate the sex class of men. I don't hate every man I know, but I think, you know, hating the sex class of men is a fundamental, should be a fundamental tenet of feminism. I mean, and I don't think we help ourselves when we are afraid to actually say all of what we think, and we're still trying to be good girls who aren't really making anyone too angry, because if we make them too angry, you know, they might hurt us, or we might not get what we want, or we might not attract enough people. I actually think that maybe we attract more people if we're clear and honest, rather than sort of saying, well, we think this, but not that much. We don't think it that much. We don't think it in a way that might hurt your feelings. You know, so I think your piece kind of got at that, and I think that's so important.
I think a thing I feel like it is the aim of, let's say, the biggest women's marches, perhaps not the suffragettes, because the suffragette marches were probably the biggest in Britain that I know of, but there are massive ones in continental Europe. They're run by the socialists. And the socialists have got something from it when they do International Women's Day marches, is they get control. And the control they want is silence the actual sex class consciousness. That's, I think, it's happened so often in my lifetime that I've got to know socialist feminists and they say, oh, we can't have those bad ones. That I think it is the plot, the plan.
Just say something about, I mean, I've got a rather long history, too long.
Yes.
But back in the 1970s, the feminist movement, there weren't many liberal feminists about, it was split really between socialist feminists and radical feminists, and socialist feminists tended to work with men and want to understand how things fitted with capitalism and so on, whereas we left the left, which we had been on, and went out to create radical feminism. But what was interesting, I was thinking today at this Lierre conference, which of course I'm banned from speaking at, I'm not banned from being, that back in 1978, the socialist feminists ran most of the conferences in Britain, the feminist conferences, which moved around from town to town. I mean, they were egalitarian and actually grassroots. They weren't run by all the directors like this conferences and so on. They didn't have speakers even. We did lots of papers. But they were ran by socialist feminists. And the socialist feminists didn't really want the radical feminists ever to sort of speak, right? And we got so fed up with them never putting us on the plenary, you know, we were our motions would be whatever in the plenary, the full meeting at the end of the conference and so on. So we did, well, actually we did a naughty thing. We went into the middle of the conference when we realised we were left over the agenda, and we all sat on the floor in the middle and we sang. We used to sing songs in a naughty way back then, and we used to sing My Old Man's a Wanker, which was to the tune of My Old Man's a Dustman, and all that kind of stuff, you know. It was a nice song. I can remember making that up. Anyway, that was a good one. But also we created book titles to show what was going on around us politically. And one of them to show how the socialist feminist left was off everything, because they were most numerous and they were the ones running all the conferences pretty much. But we had some of our own. But the big ones of 2,000, 1,000 women, 3,000 women, they were socialist feminist conferences. And we had a book title which was called drawing up the conference agenda, or drawing up the plenary agenda by I leave it off, which was based on I Levi Strauss, right? It was based on Leo Strauss, the sociologist at the time. We had lots of book titles, but I quite like I Leave It Off. But that's when I was thinking about that, and I was thinking what's going on here is basically a socialist feminist conference from the old days. It does not want radical feminists here, and I have much to be left off in 78 and 25. Now, I actually think that, yeah, that's quite something. That is quite something. Over decades and decades, the same thing happens, and they get treated in the same. Of course, it's happened to me many, 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 many times, but it's just interesting that here today, 25, I'm thinking about 78, and it's the same stuff. It's the same stuff. At the 78 conference, some of us in the group from London went up to the microphone, grabbed the microphone to speak wearing scissor earrings. Now imagine that, you understand what scissor earrings means. But also in 1978, there was a radical feminist conference here in Brighton, at which there were 3 papers on man-hating. I was involved in writing one of the papers on man-hating, and we said, you know, when we're supposed to love men and never hate them, meanwhile, hating actually for women would be self-defense, because, you know, we have babies being raped for pornography, we have women being attacked in the street. The violence against women and girls and boys is huge. I mean, it's unbelievable, and it's vile, and it's foul, and it's getting worse. And yet, we're not allowed to fight back from self-defense and have that hatred of self-defense. Because astonishing women do not hate men. They don't. I mean, what other group of people the violence that women suffer is nothing like it. All women are aware of this violence all the time. They're walking down the street in the city at night with their heels and It was freaking the city at night with the
Yeah, they hate that.
absolutely not. It's something that any other group of people who's this. And yet we must not take your man, your man.
The other thing is that the radical feminists, we've come up with some quite good answers, like say political lesbianism or working, doing direct action or action, and ideas are really coherent. And I think that is one reason why us being excluded, one, it's a terrible shame because the movement itself, we would be able to help liberate women. But it's also a lot of women would leave the left, and join the Rad Fems. And I guess that's partly why the socialist feminists don't want us to be able to speak, because let's say we all stood up at a large conference and said the sort of things, the new women would be going, oh, this radical feminism thing sounds quite nice. Let's join them. And they clearly don't want that, unfortunately. I suppose I think having looked at, I was in the socialists for a long time, and just felt it was quite depressing. You couldn't get anywhere. You kept being steered into, I was always steered into, you should do more bread and butter issues of like working class liberation, that sort of thing. Like,
Well, when the
feminism.
revolution comes, everything in feminism will be solved automatically.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
communism
Right.
will solve everything.
I just want to quote, Mary Daly, because she always liked to say that you're going to be just as punished for being a little bit of a feminist as you will be for a great big feminist.
Yes.
So sin big.
Yeah.
Yeah, sin big. And
Sin
she's
big.
an itty bitty feminist. I really like that. Being an itty bitty feminist is, sin big.
So sin big, everybody.
Yeah. Well, should we call it a day?
Let's do it.
Brilliant.
Well done.
It's a terrible shame. We'll just say, maybe we could tell people, because we've got over 100, maybe 130 on the webinar. We could tell people what it's like here in Brighton. It's a terrible shame for me because I have met so many of our international sisters here, like just in the last day, many of us have been at the Filia conference. We went to our lovely book launch yesterday, and there's loads and loads of women here who could have been in this room with us. There's just not enough time. But I think it's fantastic, and we are having really fun time here. So maybe, should we just say one or two things about being here in Brighton?
I am having a great time here in Brighton. Sheila's book launch party was absolutely brilliant and so much fun, and so much thanks to Joe for organizing it.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah, it was, and it was amazing. It actually worked. And you're speaking next week at the Battle of Ideas.
Yeah,
So Cara's at the Battle of Ideas next. Is it Saturday?
one on each day.
Oh,
So
perfect.
on Saturday, I'm sort of talking about the state of America today, which is going to be fun.
Yeah.
And on Sunday, I'm talking about gender identity outside Turf Island.
Fantastic. So that's, if you can get to that, that's in London, isn't it?
Yes.
Battle of Ideas. There'll be loads of our people, and really interesting thing to go to. I think Venice Allen's a big organizer of that. Yeah, so that's going to be a really good thing. Are you enjoying it being here?
Oh, it's great being here. A little tiny ridiculous. Just doing that, but it is wonderful seeing women from like Germany and like all these these friends of mine that you only get to see once a decade. So all of that is really great. It's just as heartbreaking that we're not allowed to be.
Yeah, it is. But
there's no radical feminism there.
Yeah, I think there are little fragments of it.
There's definitely women talking about pornography and about surrogacy.
Yeah,
it's absolutely there, and there's bits of it there. But our like as a whole, our analysis is just not welcome.
Yeah. So the analysis, because I've found lots of people, lots of the women who are not radical feminists, very friendly, really nice. So personally, well, to me, it's okay. They might not be so friendly to you, Sheila, but don't know, we can hear. What about you, Elizabeth? What are you finding?
I'm having a great time here as well. There are a lot of great sessions at Philia. There are a ton of sessions by prostitution survivors, women talking about fighting prostitution, getting women out of prostitution, anti-surrogacy, anti-porn. So there's a lot of great stuff going on. And yesterday I went to a panel where five women spoke who taught Viktor Orban and the far right in Hungary and all the awful things they're doing. A woman from China who talked about, you know, how things are for women in China. And it just made me think, you know, we really need to be working together. I mean, it's such a waste of time to have these schisms. Like we need to be working together, not least because of the rise of fascism and the far right. It's terrifying. It's happening all over the world. I'm from Chicago. Trump has literally sent the military to our streets. They're there right now attacking peaceful protesters, spraying pepper spray directly into peaceful protesters' faces. We have really big problems in this world. The far right is on the rise in many countries, and that is always terrible for women. The far right is never a friend of women, and we need to be working with all feminists instead of fighting with each other. And it's very frustrating to me when we deplatform each other. I mean, it's just like, really? Don't we have enough problems?
Yes,
you know,
it is so sad. And yeah, go on, Sheila. How are you?
I had a marvelous launch.
Yeah.
I haven't been to much of the conference because, you know, I don't feel enormously welcome, it's fair to say. But what is marvelous is meeting all these wonderful women, particularly women that I only know online through WDR. And meeting those women in the flesh is just, it's fantastic. I just absolutely love it. And it makes me so cheerful to see all these wonderful women.
Yeah.
It really does.
And we, so I'll just say that I'm very grateful to Philia. Not, I mean, it would be nice if some rad femmes could speak or some, you know, WDO, but it is fantastic to have brought so many women. It's a massive achievement. So standing by criticism of it is a huge thing. And one very strong thing was yesterday we held the book launch for Sheila's book, and all the TRAs, the protesters, were busy protesting against Philia. So we on top list we had Georgia and Lierre and all the outside checking, like our counterbalance their TRAs. And she kept coming back going, over there. Just saying, so I'm incredibly grateful to Philia for that, for taking the flak from me. But they like it was covered for stuff. Yeah, and I suppose we I mean generally we would like to help women's movement. We're not aiming to undermine it. And so for some reasons I'm very, very grateful to Philia. Okay, well maybe we should finish. We're gonna go to we're gonna party, I think. Okay, bye everybody. Have a nice time in the breakout rooms if you're there. See, we're going to actually do Rad Femme Perspectives tomorrow, but it's going to just be a rerun because we can't sort of do anything live, I think. So it'll just be a thing. But anyway, brilliant. Kerry, you have put the breakout rooms on. Oh, let me turn this on. So I think just get the people have got the breakout room links. Okay, so you're going to just have to share it. I guess lots of you have got it. Great. Well, see you probably tomorrow. See you do a recap of all the what's happened. More happened at Philia. Bye then, everybody. Lovely to see you.